Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to a table talk. This is a podcast of the beloved community, and it is great to be with everybody on this beautiful Wednesday afternoon. Today is September 13th, 2023, and my name is Erwin Lopez, and I am the co-chair of the beloved community, which works alongside the Bishop's Anti-Racist Task Force. And today, we're going to be talking with Michelle Blanco, because she has a fascinating story that we have to understand, we have to study, so that we can prevent some of this from happening in our denomination, in our churches, and in our world. Because we currently find ourselves in a culture war where there's anti-woke movement, and then there's this woke movement. There's this open up your mind movement, and there's this, no, we need to be even more conservative. And so she has a story where she finds herself in the middle. And she has just a very fascinating, interesting story about her work at CRU, and I just can't wait for you to listen to it, but I think we need to learn from her. So let me tell you a little bit more about Michelle. She's a trained missionary. She's been trained for over a decade, and she served overseas and here locally, and she's been trained by CRU, so she went through some real intense training for a long period of time. And also has a bachelor's of arts in music from UCF, and she's currently pursuing her master's of divinity from Candler. And she loves to bridge theology, culture, and race, and you can tell why from her experience. She's from Puerto Rico. She's Boricua, which is cool. And she's from Florida, and she's serving in our United Methodist Church here in the Orlando area, Spring of Life United Methodist Church. She's her discipleship director, I believe. I'm sorry if I messed that up. I'm sorry. And she also loves movies, and she has 2 children. But we can't wait for you to hear from her. Michelle Blanco, thank you so much for being with us today. And I'd love to hear your story. Just tell me about, what happened at CRU, how you started at CRU, and I tell the people your story.
Yeah, well, it's an honor to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I started my journey with CRU started back in 1996. So I'm dating myself when I graduated from high school. I grew up in a very pretty evangelical home. I was actually Pentecostal, went to a Spanish-speaking congregation. And when I got to college, I really had a heart to evangelize and to reach people for Christ. And so I was a commuter student at UCF, and the best meeting time that worked for me was with what at the time was Campus Crusade for Christ, and got involved and kind of went all in the ministry. And so I went to mission trips. I went to China. I went to just all the different conferences that were offered with what is now CRU. In 2000, I decided to be a full-time missionary actually, I was on an internship and went to Spain that year. While I was in Spain, I experienced this kind of cultural revelation about myself. I realized that during college, despite my Spanish-speaking background, I had really tried to hide away, or maybe even was ashamed of my Hispanic heritage, at least parts of it. It really kind of shed light on the fact that when I was at UCF with CRU, there was all these resources, this wealth of theological resources that were available to my white counterparts there. And I started almost internalizing the thought that God didn't really care about people like me, people like my family and the community that I came from. And when I went to Spain, I got to work under this wonderful couple who worked in Hispanic campus ministry in Las Cruces, New Mexico. And it was at that time, and with my language skills and my culture skills that were kind of innate because of my experience navigating 2 cultures, that I realized that that wealth, that financial wealth didn't necessarily equal wealth in spirit and wealth in experiences and health, even in how a person grows up and relates to the world and relates to Christianity and Jesus. And so that was really key for me. When I came back, I took some time and decided to go to full-time ministry with CRU. in 2003. And I was really excited. First, was assigned to go back to Spain, but then really decided that I wanted to minister back to my own community, and came on staff with a ministry called Destino. Was working, partially at UCF, partially also training here at the CRU's headquarters that are based here in Orlando, and was working on coaching students and staff all around the country. Now, to be CRU staff, you have to raise your own 100% of your own support or finances, payroll, healthcare, etc. This the amount that you have to raise monthly and yearly is significant. And so I was raising support for about 3.5 years and never got fully to my support goal. And so eventually I had to leave. But during that time that I was there, I started becoming somebody like a go-to person for cultural awareness, cultural knowledge. I started learning actually under the African American ministry of CRU at the time, that they have since separated from CRU, called the Impact Movement. And it was just so enlightening for me and enriching for me to be able to cross paths and learn from deeply other Christian traditions, culturally and racially, who were more justice minded. And so that was just really key to my formation and development. But I eventually had to leave staff because I could not raise enough support. In the meanwhile, I ended up getting a job at a local theme park as a performer, entertainer, which was fun, but it was also a Christian organization from which I also suffered significant amount of spiritual abuse. Um, and eventually had to leave as got married and started my family. I ended up back at CRU doing finance, and was at CRU at 10 years doing finance. So that I left in 2021. During that time, I very quickly got pulled back even though I was in finance in a paid role, I didn't have to raise my own support anymore. I quickly got called back into ministry type work and activities. So, which my director in the finance department was very much into having paid staff more integrated into ministry, more direct ministry type work. So didn't believe a ton in the separation of the administrative to face-to-face in-person ministry. And so I was, definitely blessed to do that. Got called into a lot of conversations, cultural conversations, panels, etc., because there was kind of this move toward really discovering, as a primarily white organization, what was our history with race and racism, really confronting that. There was just like a big move in that direction that really ramped up in 2015, and ended up getting kind of called into this like leadership academy type thing. We could call it a learning initiative, a senior leadership institute, where I met a lot of other BIPOC people of color that were also kind of, the focus again was that leadership was an issue, right? There was not enough BIPOC leaders. And so we got called in as kind of like the forefront of people who might lead the ministry at the time. And at the same time, unrelated to what I was doing, there was this other ministry called the Lenses Institute that was starting in CRU's athletic ministry called Athletes in Action. And they were starting to kind of pick up as well. And eventually in 2017, we got, several of us got invited to a training for Lenses facilitators, because Lenses was going to expand past the athletes ministry to all of CRU. Now, CRU, in case you don't know, it's like here in the United States, there's like 8,000 staff. It's, one of the largest ministries of its kind. And yeah, so the idea was to be able to take all more staff through this kind of intense training that was 5 days, very much an emotional time together. It was a time of honest conversation, a time that was kind of increasingly um, vulnerable and continued kind of seeking ways. I mean, they would use kind of all kinds of different ways that we would use games, or we would use museum visits, site visits, speakers, just really hard, honest conversations about privilege. We eventually started separating the groups because of just kind of things that we realized as people who are in the dominant culture or white culture are learning things that have already been known to BIPOC. There would be definitely some tensions that would kind of build up there that probably weren't healthy for BIPOC. So we started kind of learning as we go what was learning a good, healthy learning that was not at the cost of our BIPOC staff. So we started separating a bit there, but then kind of with the political events of 2016, 2017, and kind of the increasing tensions there, by 2019, we started seeing some significant pushback, especially from kind of very conservative YouTubers and bloggers that were saying that CRU was going away from its mission to reach people, that Lenses taught critical race theory, that other areas of CRU were also doing the same, especially because in CRU you have to go through, take a certain amount of seminary credits to kind of receive a certificate of ministry that you kind of take as you do ministry. And so that curriculum was changing. And so we started going into kind of people started saying that we were, just falling away from the mission. There was a group of people that wrote a 169-page document. I'm referenced in that document as well, although not by name, about why CRU is going in the wrong direction in training staff about basically the church's history, the US history that has led us to continue to be segregated, that keeps people oppressed, especially ethnic minorities, even those that are Christians. And how the church has participated or been indifferent to the marginalization and the oppression and suffering that has happened in our country. And so we are, all of our website content and content started going into an audit process with a new national director. And it continued to kind of progress. It turned from an audit to a reimagining, right? These were things that we used to reframe certain concepts and certain things. And using people that had never been to an institute, that would speak into its content. We had to take all of our books, anything from Ibram X. Kendi to just like any kind of resources that were anti-racist resources had to be removed. And then it went from like, let's pause Lenses, and then to let's stop Lenses. So at this point, I was now part of the executive leadership team for Lenses. And we made a unanimous decision that rather than having CRU have control of that process, that we would take control of the process and actually close Lenses down. So this is a pretty common process, especially in primarily white organizations, not just CRU, but lots of other places, where something that a BIPOC person starts, like an initiative, will eventually like get taken over because they don't like kind of the direction that it's going in. And so also, by the way, very much dominated by donors calling in and saying that they don't like the direction that CRU's going. So this has happened many times in CRUs. A BIPOC person will start something, and then leadership, which is primarily male and white, will come in and say, we're not comfortable with how this is being led or headed, so we're going to assign this other person to lead it instead, and we're going to change X, Y, and Z about it. So rather than that happen, we made a very public decision on Twitter and lots of places to say we are closing this down. We have felt that the environment has not been one that has been an environment of intimidation and oppression. We're just kind of very clear about what we were going through. And we decided to close it down. We ended up getting comments from people like Lisa Sharon Harper or Kirsten DeMay or Jamar Tisby, all of whom talk significantly about the history of the church and oppression within the larger dominant culture. And we left, and so a big hullabaloo started after that. Probably most of us on the executive team have left the organization. And yeah, it's just very unfortunate that even though this whole initiative around race and justice was started by a previous leader, everything got blamed pretty much on the BIPOC that responded to that call of the former leadership. So there was no solidarity, no one saying, hey, that's not true. You're mischaracterizing them. You are basically lying about this particular group. And none of that was called out. So that's a bit about my story. Yeah.
No, I appreciate everything you've shared, and listening to your story and reading your paper as well. I got to know Adrian Pay,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been reading his book, The Minority Experience, and
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of similarities between what you experienced and what he experienced. And
Mm-hmm.
I haven't gotten to the end of the book, but I'm guessing the end is going to sound similar. But I first want to ask you about your experience as a college student, partly because I'm a college student. I'm not a college student. I lead a college ministry. Oh my gosh.
You
Maybe I am.
wish.
I wish I was a college student. Yeah. And I work with college students, and CRU is probably the biggest ministry on campus.
Mm-hmm.
And I worry about some of the students who go to not just that ministry, but most ministries have the same theology as CRU in
Yes.
UCF. It's a historically white, male dominated conservative theology. And
Right.
and I remember, this is kind of a funny story, that one time CRU was doing a project and there was like 80 people on campus. And I remember them walking around, and I remember seeing the minorities. There was a small group of minority students there, mainly white students. And I remember them making eye contact with me. And I just remember feeling as though I wish I could talk to them. I wish I could warn them. But I don't know how. And I feel like that wasn't my place. And so can we go back
Right.
to when you were a college student?
Mm-hmm.
What was it that you experienced? And, for me, looking back, when I see myself, why is it that I put myself in a situation that's all white spaces, right? I decided to go here, and I really enjoyed it, right? And so what is it about us? And what was happening to you when you were a college student? Just can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I started college when I was 17, and at the time, almost, one of the things I like to focus on now as a parent is raising anti-racist children and making kids more socially conscious and racially conscious about what's going on around them. But I was raised with none of that, and so although I grew up in a Spanish-speaking congregation, I definitely knew that I was different. But the most important thing is that you're a Christian, right? And so your culture essentially, I mean, it matters, but not that much. I mean, that was what I grew up with. I no longer believe that it is at all. But I just wanted to tell other people about Christ. And so I was, not thinking heavily. I mean, I remember when people would meet me, and those people that knew me at the time would say I was very shy. And I was, in general, much shyer than I am at, my age right now. But even more so because I was facing two cultural differences, which is one denominational, and also cultural, ethnically different. And so when you go into a new culture, there is these unwritten rules that are kind of around about what you talk about, what you know about, even knowledge of like music and bands and foods and traditions and all of those things that you don't really think about when you're going into a new environment and you're like, and I don't even know if I could definitely not articulate what I was feeling or observing at the time, especially at 17. Um, and so yeah, so I didn't consider it a huge deal. I mean, especially at the time, there was definitely not a place where I could express my faith and be a Latina at the same time. And um, so yeah, that's a bit of what I was thinking, and it's not uncommon even today.
Did anybody talk to you? Did anybody warn you? Did
No. I did like from my youth pastor at the time. I remember showing him a brochure and he's like, oh, like they put the people of color here. I think that was like the main thing. But he too, went to a Christian university that was primarily white. Like it's not like we have, but at the time I was probably more like in denial. Like these people, I was more focused on, there's always when you go into a new culture, like a honeymoon phase, where you see only the positive in that culture and the negative in your own. And in IDI speak, that's polarization reversal. And so you think of cultures as us versus them, and then for many ethnic minorities and many BIPOC, it's my culture is inferior because my culture is poorer. There's more crime or drugs or whatever in my culture, at least what you think there is. Because that's all you see represented on TV, or that's how people talk about your culture. And so you believe those things when you go in, and you don't really question them.
do you feel as though it is our role to warn people about this? If so, how? You know,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think?
Yeah, I probably definitely would start a conversation in some ways, like in almost any case that you have to address or warn people, there's usually trust involved, rightly so, right? And so if somebody doesn't know you, they don't know whether you have their best interests in mind or not. Um, Especially if they're coming from a place where they warn other people, hey, you're going to hell. And they may not see the fact that they're not earning trust saying that either. um, but but usually there's some trust involved, and sometimes that's for some people that's more easily um like that topic is more easily broached than others, because some people, depending on their assimilation level, um are have either rejected or maybe in a place of questioning. They might be like, do I belong here? And I would say that's probably true for a majority of Hispanic Latino students um on the college campus. They're probably were not as easily not to make myself look like um what's the word, gullible. um so like I really really wanted to be in a part of a Christian organization, and would I have been warned, would I have even taken it? I'm not sure, but I would also say it's not bad to try, especially if you can start a conversation that quickly builds trust with that person.
I see, so many students who are in the situation that you were in, and I feel for them. I worry for
Hmm.
them.
Yep.
Oh, well, let's talk a little bit about this. I love this. I kind of want to remind the people about noticing patterns. And you talked about this pattern and that we should be aware of these patterns. You said first it started with an auditing process. Then they renamed that to a reimagining. And then they started removing anti-racist resources. And this is exactly what's happening in our government. This is what's happening in our world. And then they said, stop, let's pause.
Florida, especially.
Yeah, Florida especially, right? Look at this. And then initiatives led by people of color get overtaken by white people. Um,
Hmm.
and so can we just talk a little bit about that? Because that's exactly what's happening in the world, in the government, and I'm worried that that may happen in the United Methodist Church. And I want
Mm.
everybody to notice the patterns. But we are making great efforts. Um, so I don't know if you want to share anything specifically on that. Maybe what is next, or what would a ministry that is not closed minded like this, what would that? I don't know. You want to expand on this?
Yeah, I would say there were some things early on that I was a little worried about, even in back in 2016, 2017, or even 2015. Um, I was like, is anybody like, I know that people are trying to help align our staff in the way they think about race. And there, some of them are resistant, some are not. But is anybody talking to our donors and really focusing on their development, spiritual development in this area? Um, because I mean, while we may not believe this, we do treat donors many times, major donors, as if they don't have anything, any spiritual growth um, to learn from those of us that are nowhere near their level of wealth. And that is could not be further from the truth according to Jesus. and so, um, and so, yeah, where is the money coming from? Is one of the main questions, and what are ways that we can um, n- plan like concurrently, right? You want to be able to train our clergy and our lay people to adapt well and to be aware of power dynamics when they're in their churches, and be aware of who is can't speak English, and who might feel out of place because they're a darker skin tone, and to really name those things and be very just competent around differences and how to handle them in ways that are honoring to those differences and not marginalizing. And so, um, but yeah, concurrently, we need to talk about what it means for people to kind of control with their money the outcomes of our churches, which so much rides on, you know, and what are different models we can use. And, and I know the UMC right now is going through a split that is a very costly one. um, it's good for sure that you can see that they're willing to take those losses. Um, because I mean, that's just, a point in the positive column, we'll say, because that's usually where, as they say, the buck stops here. That's not technically I don't think what that phrase means, but you can kind of use it, the buck, the financial buck, that's where it stops. Um, is when donors, are no longer willing to support a ministry that talks about race and racism and gets involved in politics and all of that, which is ironic because that was, a lot of the very early starts of the Methodist Church were about social issues. Um, so yeah, I would
No,
say
that's great.
yeah, the
That's great.
mhm,
I love your donor development piece.
mhm,
And they have to
yeah.
grow
That
too,
was always like
right? They have to grow too.
they do. You have to invest. I mean, a lot of times they're very busy, and they're like, I just want well, there's a couple of ways. There are right ones that really give for the right reasons, like it's not my money, it's God's money, and I'm gonna give because it's not, spiritually speaking and ethically speaking, it's not mine. And then there's those who may give for tax purposes, right? But don't want to put their money in things that are politically going to hurt them either. Because many justice efforts do politically hurt them if they are making just extraordinary amounts of wealth, right? It's kind of racial initiatives and just a lot of supporting public schools and public education, higher taxes, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's that, and then there's those that are like, I just, I don't want my money going to places that are not about the gospel, meaning like evangelism. If it's anything outside of that, then it's not really any different than supporting any other benevolence organization.
I know we're doing the podcast, and I know there's clergy and laity listening to this, and I just wonder if we can briefly discuss what this means for us as Christians. The idea that historically evangelism has been colonialism. It has been the stripping of people's culture, whether they do it systematically or they do it violently. That's what the history of Christianity has been. And so as a leader in the church, how do you navigate that? How do you continue to profess Christ and even do this hard work of anti-racism, knowing what you know?
Yeah, I get asked that a lot, especially when I tell my story in the continuous, because I didn't even share all of it about church spiritual abuse, because I also went to church throughout all these years and experienced a ton of corruption and harassment, sexual harassment included. And so some people are like, why are you still here? And I was like, because I'm recognizing that the world in which Jesus lived and the world that we live now are vastly different. And so culturally and all else, like I love Jesus. And brown, darker skinned Jesus, and all his words in scripture. I may have issues with some of them too, but overall, I don't want to let whiteness and colonialism colonize the Bible, because that's basically what's happening. On top of colonizing cultures, it's colonizing the people that are in those scriptures that we read. And so I would like at least a shot at following the non-colonized people in scripture and see what they have to say about my life and about the church's life. And be able to live into that and not be someone who colonizes, but to somebody that worries about the well-being and health, spiritually, emotionally, physically, of all creation. So.
Okay, well, I appreciate you answering that question. I'm sure it's not like an easy question to answer in terms of the emotional connection that you have to it. One of the things I was thinking too is we should title this podcast "From CRU to the UMC." What do you think about that?
That's a possibility too.
Yeah, I think that's interesting.
For sure. I mean, no place is perfect, right?
Right. No place is perfect.
So,
No, you're right. No place is perfect. But I want to talk a little bit about this transition. So, okay, you were a crew and that happened.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're in the United
Mm-hmm.
Methodist Church and you're full
Mm-hmm.
time at a local church here, Spring of Life, which, by the way, if anybody in Spring of Life is listening to this, a big shout out to you guys. You guys are really the only church that has been reaching out in the district who has been wanting to engage in some of this work, and you're very passionate about it. And so, shout out to you for leading that. Shout out to Pastor Mike too. He's so generous. I'm so thankful for your church. So, anyways,
Mm-hmm. Thank
tell us what you're doing in the United Methodist Church. What kind of work? How is this impacting your ministry? What's it like being a United Methodist? Give me some on the
mm-hmm.
ground type stuff.
Yeah. I'm still learning, because I come from first Pentecostal, then kind of Baptist Presbyterian-y kind of way, and then the non-denominational, which probably dominated most of it. And so the polity and structure of the UMC is like I'm just like learning it, all new. And so there's definitely things that I appreciate about, especially the accountability part of the UMC structure, with how who pastors report to you. I've probably never been in a ministry that is so conscious about how they take care of their kids, um, as far as safety and safe sanctuaries and all that stuff, that is consistently talked about in my classrooms, when it comes to ministry ideas, and people kind of shooting things back and forth. Who was like, is that safe sanctuary compliant? Like there's just constantly kind of talking about what the requirements are to protect kids. And given where the evangelical world is right now with that, I would say that's a major, um, you know, that's something that I definitely appreciate. I'm the director of discipleship at Spring of Life. So currently this, it's still kind of a smaller church or newer church compared to other Methodist churches, and it's still in a very growing area of Lake Nona. So did you have something to say? You're muted.
Hello, you there? Hello?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, my Zoom just got signed out.
Interesting.
Hold on 1 second, okay?
Sure.
I apologize for that.
No problem.
You know what? Let's keep going. I think we're good.
Okay. Where
So,
was
okay,
I?
so you're director of discipleship at Spring of Life United Methodist Church. It's a smaller congregation, okay?
Yep. It's been around for 20 years. And so definitely still, especially after COVID, adjusting to life post COVID and reestablishing small groups and that kind of thing, which is, part of my job. I would say, I only work there like a few hours a week because I'm a full-time MDiv student at Candler. Um, so uh, so yeah, I just uh, like I wish I would have had a little bit more time at the church to kind of really gain more knowledge of that time, but the time is limited right now. And so yeah, just kind of love being a part of people's lives. Sorry that my text is beeping right now. Let me see if I can mute that. Okay. So what else about I really, really appreciate my time at Candler, which is a United Methodist, primarily United Methodist seminary. Um, there's but there's lots of different diversity. Like there's a Episcopal track and a Roman Catholic track and a Baptist track, and there's definitely a lot of influence, as well, that we get to experience from AME students and professors. So that has been super enriching for me, super affirming um, of where I currently theologically am, and where my heart is when it comes to justice. I'm currently thinking about concentrating on chaplaincy and then also justice, peace, and conflict transformation, because that's very near and dear to my heart. And so I really am appreciative of the opportunity to be able to exercise my gifts fully, um, if not necessarily because of time constraints in the United Methodist Church, like in my local church, but also at Candler itself. That is a whole story too, because a dear friend of mine, um, the reason I'm at Candler is because she became a dean at Candler the same year, the same year I became a member of the UMC. And she let me know that there was scholarships. She's like, have you considered getting your MDiv? And I'm like, not really, because I can't afford it. And I'm a mom. Do I really have time? Um, can I afford not having a full-time job, etc. And yeah, so she let me know and was able to um give a recommendation and encourage me to apply. And that's why I'm at Candler, UMC's seminary, and go to a UMC church, which happened to coincide in a nice little coincidence, happy coincidence.
Well, we're glad you're here. Stick with it.
Mhm. Thanks.
We're trying to build more support for people of color, and so
So important.
we're trying.
As you know, I firmly believe that actually most places are not doing enough, to help people of color not feel isolated in ministry, to help them feel encouraged, to help them feel like they're not crazy when they experience certain things in their churches or in their leadership and the general structure and systems that they have to navigate in the United Methodist Church. Just so many things, because most systems are not by us and for us, and so we have to learn to live in separate worlds.
I agree 100%. I know. I wish I was given
Mhm.
some kind of support group or some kind of small
Mhm.
community. But
Yep,
I have just a couple more questions for you, Michelle.
sure.
Um, One of them is about your IDI training.
Mhm.
Can you tell us about IDI? Educate me on IDI. Um,
Sure.
Maybe give me an
IDI,
example. Go ahead.
sure. IDI stands for the Intercultural Development Inventory, and it is a 50-question test that determines whether someone is in a particular place on a continuum. It is a developmental inventory, so it's not typological like MBTI or Myers-Briggs, or Strengths Finders, or any of the Berkman, any of those kind of standard tests that you might take at your job, that type you into a certain personality, right? This is a developmental inventory. If you've ever heard of the EQI, it's more akin to like, hey, this is a place where you can grow. And that's what the IDI does, but for intercultural competence. So, I mean, I can give you kind of an example of myself, right? Most people, there's five parts of the continuum: denial, polarization, minimization, acceptance, and adaptation. And so denial and polarization are mindsets that are more monocultural. Minimization, the middle one, is a transitionary um, part of the continuum. And then the other two mindsets are acceptance and adaptation, which are more adaptive to other cultures. And so most people are in this middle one, in minimization. And um, and and regardless of whether you are BIPOC or dominant culture, white, from the mainly European side, it's still about 60 to 65%. And so this was very enlightening for me as a Latina that I fell into that middle category. So and I'm like, I'm here. I was already in lenses. I was working for justice, a justice ministry, talking about these things, etc. And I fall like in the middle. It was like a sense of shame that came out, which usually that's one of the things that the IDI might be known for is um is the fact that you want to be further along in your ability to bridge differences. And so it really helps me to think about it sometimes in a way that doesn't put ethnicity or race at the center, but maybe in my ability to bridge across differences in abilities. For example, if someone has a disability that I'm not familiar with, and I have to learn now about like what is it that can make a person who experiences disability um, or who has a disability how to make them feel seen and included um and not like they're marginalized but honored, as I use that word, honored and completely a part of the larger whole and an important part of the larger whole. So it helps in that sense, and of course it helps in just your standard, like somebody comes in, they may come from a country you're completely not familiar with. And so if they may come from Thailand and they may have traditions and cultural behaviors that you have never experienced before. And how do you help to, um, first of all, usually the first thing is actually self-knowledge. So like what are your own isms that you're not aware of? Like what are places where you step into a place and you have things, behaviors that other people may not be used to because you are the different one. And so that's usually the first step. But eventually it's to get to the acceptance and adaptation part of how to help that other person um feel included and be themselves. And it's usually and how to help them adapt and you adapt, like mutual adaptation. And so it's been key for me, especially as I interact with people who, like one of the more um, difficult ones, I would say sometimes, especially when you're dealing with majority culture, let's say in a cis white male environment, right? And they are in polarization defense. There's polarization defense and polarization reversal, right? Polarization defense is my culture is better than your culture. Is basically the short version of that. Us versus them mindset. When you have a cis white male that's in polarization defense, and they have power, then you will experience that that sense of, okay, I'm not. He doesn't see me as an equal in more ways than one, not just in my place, but also in how I want to do ministry in life or my job. Um, and in conversations with other people, like let's say they don't have power, it helps me to say, I don't have the trust built with this person to engage this conversation in a way that is going to honor myself and my body. Um, and therefore, I can choose to not engage if I am not at a place where I can engage in a way that is patient, right, or is able to really do any good in that person's life or my own. So that's just a brief summary.
How long is the training?
It is so there's different options, and so like let's say you wanted to do the IDI, you would take the test. It's like 20 minutes to take the test. And it would be, you have to debrief it with an IDI qualified administrator, or so you can debrief it with me, and that takes an hour. Now, if you wanted to do like a group thing, we also assess the group's score, and create goals for the group. So, but back to just the one-on-one with you and I, it would be, so then afterward, I would give you like a form that you would try to do in about 3 months' time that helps you increase your score and increase your intercultural competence. So that part of it is just based on your availability, your willingness to want to engage. But then there's the church part or nonprofit, whatever organization you're part of, that, if I have like a group of 10, each one would take the test. I would debrief with each of them, but I would also go over their group score and how they as a group will come off, or how they will be felt, what their impact will be. If their impact as a whole is minimization, then the church as a whole will be more minimization, is more like, let's focus on what we have in common, forget our differences. In which case, a lot of people with differences will still feel marginalized in that sense, because they will just need to learn that to bring their common ground things and not their differences. So, that makes sense? So if you want to do like a full day, I did like a half day to kind of introduce culture as a concept and how we define it, et cetera, do some activities that get people kind of start thinking about it, and then do IDIs, and then do a kind of a final, like, here's your group score, here's things you can do. We can do a full day thing where we actually come up with a strategic plan for the church or for the group. And with IDI is very action oriented. Somebody even told me the other day that I had done their IDI with them. She said, do you have a book I can read to help continue to grow? I was like, remember, it's action oriented. So just take that form that I gave you. And for real, it's actually a really good plan that it gives you, so that you can start digging into where you really need to grow most. And so putting plans down on paper and actually doing them is key. And that will help people in your church or people in your group in UCF feel more that you're taking more actions, and not so uncomfortable with their differences.
And you believe everybody should take this? Every church person, every just person, right? You're a big believer in this.
I do, because of how it's impacted me, for sure. So I'm very evangelistic as a person. I was good at sales for things I believe in. So
CRU help with that. CRU is great with their marketing and their evangelism.
They are. They are. So we aligned there for a little bit.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I feel like this was very informative. I describe it as fascinating, interesting, and I hope that whoever is listening to this can learn and study from what she went through, and can also implement some of this in their ministry. You can implement the IDI training. You can reach out to Michelle. We'll share her contact information with you. And just check out the ministry of Spring of Life United Methodist Church. That's where she's at. And Michelle, thank you so much for your time. I don't know if you want to close with anything. You want to encourage our clergy brothers and sisters and everybody in between, and anything you want to say?
Yeah, I would just encourage people to continue to, Ted Lasso wasn't the first person to say this, so I just don't want to give credit to Ted. I've actually been saying this for a while, because it's an IDI phrase too, that stay curious, not judgmental. And so, or judgment and curiosity can't occupy the same space at the same time. And so, if you come across a difference and you don't know what to do with it, you have to kind of consciously tell yourself, what is it about that difference? And so stay curious is my mantra. In fact, I do have a blog called Curious Theology. It's michelleblanco.substack.com. And you can kind of see what I'm writing there. A lot of it is school assignments that, I can publish, but yeah.